This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Hornady. They make some of the best, most accurate, dependable ammo on the planet. No matter if you're coyote hunting or plinking steel or hunting big game out west or even going to Africa, they make a bullet or an ammo just for you. Some of the most accurate and dependable ammo on the planet. Also, check out my podcast with Steve Hornady and learn about ammo as well as their story and some funny anecdotes from Steve. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Silencer Central. Silencer Central, thank you for supporting us. If you would like to support Silencer Central, if you have any interest in a silencer, which I encourage because it is a game changer in the field, check out silencercentral.com. They will walk you through the paperwork online as well as they can ship that silencer directly to your doorstep. So check them out and tell them Ike sent you. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Eberly Stock. Eberly Stock is one of my favorite backpacks. Now, I've been wearing their backpack for almost 20 years. They have lightweight backpacks. They have modular backpacks, everything from their mainframe, which is just a frame pack that you can put bags on. They have these cool outside called bat wings that you can use. So check them out at eberlystock.com and make sure you tell them Ike sent you. So David Willms, I appreciate you jumping on here and doing it so quickly. Obviously, time is of the essence in what we're going to talk about today is the public land. I guess they could call it sell that's in part of the big, beautiful bill. Let's talk a little bit about who you are, your history, and where you come from. And that way give the audience kind of a understanding of why you're a leading authority of what's actually happening here.
Yeah, you bet. And first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate you leaning in on this topic a lot. So, yeah, you said I'm David Willms. I'm a Wyoming raised guy. Spent my whole life here. Spent my whole career here. I'm an attorney by trade. Actually, started as a wildlife biologist. Went to law school. And then I've worked in the natural resource world. I spent time in private practice. I spent time at the Attorney General's office for the state, representing, Game and Fish Department, State Engineer's office, some of our major natural resource agencies of the state. Worked for Governor Meade as a policy advisor for his second term, and then joined National Wildlife Federation after that. I've been here now for 6.5 years, and I'm our associate vice president for public lands. Big time, like Wyoming matters to me. Public lands matter to me. I just drew awesome tags yesterday, by the way.
You lucky dog. I got nothing.
I drew a great mule deer tag and a great antelope tag, and I'm stuck with a general elk tag, but we live in the golden age of elk, so I'll live with that, right?
Yep.
So I'm feeling pretty good about things right now, as long as I have a place to actually go hunt them.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't get sold off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you're living in Cheyenne, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So because you've worked in politics and understand bills and understand writing them, you're attorney by trade, obviously a huge advocate for hunters, for outdoors recreating sports. What is unique? Well, let me back up. Why did they put this in here? What do you think? What do you feel is the reasoning that this sell-off of public land got attached to a budget bill?
Well, so, I mean, without getting too wonky, right? It doesn't happen very often where the stars align and you have the White House, the House, and the Senate all controlled by one political party. And when that happens, that political party, whether it's Republican or Democrat, right? They're going to strike while the iron's hot, and they're going to try and pass things that they might not otherwise be able to do. And this budget reconciliation process becomes a pretty important vehicle, because on the Senate side in particular, and I'll say this, on the House side, everything's a majority vote. You just need to get one more than half to pass a bill regardless. On the Senate side, there's always been this 60 vote threshold. There's a rule that requires 60 votes to pass a bill, with some exceptions. And one of the exceptions is this budget reconciliation process that we're going through right now, where you really only need 51 votes. So on the Senate, you almost always had to be bipartisan, because no party ever had this 60 vote threshold. But they do have the 51 vote threshold because they have 53 Republicans, right? So I think what you saw here was a process where they could move things fast and on party lines. They don't need a single Democrat to vote for anything. And you've seen President Trump talking about this bill and all of the things that are in it. Well, I think what happened here is Senator Lee saw an opportunity to jab in, Senator Lee from Utah, to throw in something that's been a high priority of his. It's been no secret for a decade or more for him that he wants to get rid of federal lands. He doesn't think the federal government should have these lands. I think he saw an opportunity here saying, this is a must-pass bill. We're working on a tight timeline. Republicans don't want to be viewed as upsetting, getting sideways with the president and not supporting this priority. And so I can jam this in there and we have as good a chance as any as passing it in this type of environment. I think that's what it boils down to, is timing.
Wow. So, okay. So you mentioned Senator Lee. Was he the one that was behind the Bears ear thing the last time Trump was president?
You mean the push to rescind Bears ears?
Yes.
Or greatly reduce it.
Right.
He was one of them. There were more than one there was more than one person behind that, but certainly he was a leading voice on it.
So he's been trying to do this for the better part of a decade.
Yeah, I'd say since he got into politics. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to look far. He's done a lot of interviews. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth or anything.
No.
I'm just taking the words that he's used, which,
right.
He's talked about, he doesn't think it's appropriate for the federal government to be controlling so many lands. And he thinks that we should be selling some of them, or a lot of them.
So there's a couple things. Number one, I really appreciate you writing that blog. And folks, if you haven't read it, get on eastmans.com. David did a beautiful job detailing what this chunk of this bill is, not the whole bill, but what this public land sell-off chunk of the bill is, and what it says, actually what it says, not this rhetoric that we're hearing from both sides. It's, what it actually says, what the potential problems are, and, where it's going. And it's really well done, David. I appreciate that. So there's a couple things in there that scare me. Number one, it's mandated they're mandated to sell up to 5 million acres.
Not 5 million. So it's up to just over 3 million.
Okay,
acres.
I thought it was 3 million with the Forest Service and 2 million with the BLM, or I might have that backwards.
No, so the way it's written, it's written as 1/4 of 1/2 of 1% at the low end and 3/4 of 1% at the high end of Forest Service and of BLM.
Okay.
And when you add those acreages up, it comes up to between just over 2 million acres and just over 3 million acres. But you're right, it's a mandate. They must sell at least that low end of just over 2 million acres. And then there's a cap on it of they can't sell more than the just over 3 million. So that's where that 2 to 3 million range comes from.
Okay, so now let's talk about how big 2 and 3 million acres are.
Yeah. So the way I described it in the blog, right?
Yes.
And we'll go with the high end of this. I'm going to go with the 3 million acre side of this. You could sell off the states of Delaware and Rhode Island completely and still have to find another 1 million acres to sell. You could
sell them off twice, basically.
Yeah, just about. Yeah. You could sell off the entire state of Connecticut.
Oh my gosh.
You could sell off all of Yellowstone National Park and Yosemite National Park combined, like acreage. That's for scale of like how many acres we're talking about. When somebody says we're just nibbling around the edges, and it's the way it was drafted, right? It's creative. Drafted as saying it's just 1/2 of 1%, or 3/4 of 1%. We're talking less than 1% of the federal land. And we're not even talking of all federal land. We're talking less than 1% of the BLM and Forest Service land. So he's trying to spin this as it's a teeny tiny number. But when you do the math and then put it to scale of what it actually means, like we have states that don't have this many acres,
So that okay, that blows me away. But it's not like they're selling off a chunk, one giant chunk. They're selling off 2,000 acres, 300 acres, 500 acres. who's determining what acreages get sold off?
So the way the bill is drafted, it gives really all of the discretion to the Secretaries of Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture to determine what lands are sold. Anybody can nominate a parcel. So let's back up just 1 second, because just because they say the percentage comes from all these Forest Service lands and BLM lands in the country. Forest Service, there's actually this weird thing where eastern forests aren't included because most of them weren't carved out of federal land to begin with. They were reacquired lands. And this bill is specific that the only lands it comes out of are like the reserved lands that were reserved out of federal lands to begin with. So we're talking about western forests. But the acreage we're looking at, there are exceptions to what acres can be sold. So it doesn't mean that for example, all 200 and whatever it is, 40 million acres of BLM lands could be sold. So you have to narrow it down, and there are exclusions. So think of federal designations to begin with. The bill says no national parks, no monuments, no wilderness areas, no wild and scenic rivers, no national battlefields, historic sites, those things. It also says the sale is limited to only 11 states. So think all Western states, including Alaska, except Montana is explicitly carved out. So no acres in Montana are on the menu. And then the other layer on top of this is the bill says if there are valid existing rights, they define this term valid existing rights and say if you have a valid existing right, and they define it to include things like a mining claim, an oil and gas lease, a grazing permit, and then potentially some other things, although they don't say what those are. Those lands can't be sold. So the menu of what can be sold is what's left, right? What are those acres that don't have those on them? So it's actually it's still a big number of what's on the table, but it's not everything. So I think that is an important factual piece.
So what do you think the reasoning behind this is? I know that there's people that are saying, oh, it's affordable housing. If you live out west, that's not the case. There's no way it's affordable housing if you're selling it at market value. That land it doesn't make sense to put affordable housing on market valued property.
Yeah, I mean, the places where you have real affordable housing issues, because that's not everywhere in the West.
Right.
Like your point, the place where you have the real affordable housing issues, selling land at fair market value, like I can't afford to go into Jackson Hole and buy an acre of land. I couldn't buy a postage stamp of land there, let alone an acre or 5 acres.
Yeah.
It's, unless you're giving that land away or heavily reducing the price, it's not going to affordable housing. And oh, by the way, Teton County commissioners, I believe, already sent in a letter to the delegation saying exempt us from this. Yeah.
So that's interesting, because I assumed, okay, so I was born in Jackson Hole, 5th generation there. I mean, grew up there. And I assumed this, one of the things they were trying to do is move that elk refuge fence. Because if you don't know, the elk refuge fence it borders town. It's right up against neighborhoods. And I was assuming they were going to try and move that and then put a new subdivision in.
Yeah, except the elk refuge is considered a wildlife refuge, and those acres are explicitly excluded.
Yeah,
as well.
Okay.
But also, the county commissioners. I mean, I'm looking at Teton County, and on affordable housing in the West, they're the tip of the spear. I mean, people are, hotels and restaurants, they're busing in their workforce from hours away because they can't afford to live there, building tiny homes in parking lots for their staff because they can't afford lodging. I mean, if you want to talk about the epicenter of the affordable housing crisis, a place like Jackson Hole is it. And the county there is saying, we don't like this bill. We don't want this. This isn't the way to do it.
Wow.
And so that kind of undercuts the argument that some of the proponents of this are making, is that it's for affordable housing. Also, as I note in that blog, the word or the phrase affordable housing isn't used a single time in the bill. So it's under the guise of affordable housing, but it's not used. And actually, when you dive into it and see, okay, how are the secretaries supposed to prioritize their lands for sale? There's a prioritization list. So somebody nominates a parcel. And by somebody, I mean, that's another undefined term. It could be a state, a county, it could be a tribe, it could be you or me, it could be a giant corporation, it could be a foreign-owned corporation, it could be a foreign government. Right? It's not defined. Right? So anybody could nominate it. But so say once it's nominated and the secretaries are looking at it, they are required by this bill to prioritize certain types of land for sale. And yes, some of them are lands that are adjacent to infrastructure or near housing, existing housing. So you could look at that and say, okay, there could be a housing element to some of this land. But other parts of it are to reduce checkerboards, checkerboard landscapes, or to sell isolated parcels that are difficult to manage. Neither one of those things, in my experience, are just right in your backyard if you're living in a town in Wyoming or in the West, right? You're talking about some far-reaching stuff that actually could be some really important habitat for wildlife.
Yeah. So I want to get into the wildlife side of this, but before we do that, you mentioned checkerboard. So if I had a ranch in this checkerboarded area, and say a court just passed that corner crossing is legal, and I had a checkerboard chunk and I grazed on that checkerboard BLM, I could relinquish my grazing lease and then nominate that to be sold and then purchase it. Yeah, and then once it's purchased, it's mine. I can do whatever with. I can sell the whole thing off to the Chinese government.
Bingo. So that's the example. And maybe people might look at that and say it's an extreme example, but when you're drafting legislation, you don't know where loopholes are going to take you down the road 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 2 years from now. Who knows? You work with the words on the page, right, and what they say. And right now, the words on the page, so you can't sell lands that have a grazing right on them. But you and I know that in those checkerboards, the one thing it does, the bill also does is, for most people, for you and I, if we went in to buy a piece of property, well, I don't know about you, maybe you have a huge ranch I don't know about. But for you and I, if we went in to nominate a parcel and wanted to buy it or something like that, we'd be limited to one parcel, or two. And it might be 2 acres, it might be 100 acres, I don't know, but we'd be limited to 2 at an auction. If you are a landowner adjacent to public land, there's no limit. You can buy as much as you want. So that's where I get to this example of checkerboard, because there's no limit to what you can nominate and what you can buy. And if you're in the checkerboard, and those of us in Wyoming know this, right? If you're a rancher and you give up your grazing lease, another rancher is not going to come in there and buy up that lease because of that land, that land ownership pattern. It would be impossible to move your livestock around. Like, it's just impossible. You couldn't do it.
Yeah, and those checkerboard places they're not fenced. It's not like this across that fence is the BLM. It's just open. You wouldn't know unless you had an Onyx GPS map where it starts and where it ends.
That's right. So all these checkerboard, the people that have the grazing lease are the ones that are adjacent to it. And because it's unfenced and everything, so they can run their livestock over all these sections and then move them to different allotments. But so if they give up their grazing lease, which would then open up those parcels to being eligible for sale, nobody's going to come in and bid on or outbid them on that, because you're not going to be able to access. The state has a right of first refusal, but why would the state want to buy those lands? They've just created their own checkerboard nightmare. They don't want that. So the landowner is going to be at the front of the line. Right. So the landowner will be at the front of the line and probably the only one in line. And it was the example I gave of, if you want to work around on checkerboard and you want to lock people out and prevent people from corner crossing, just give up your grazing lease, buy it outright, and then put up your no trespassing signs.
So what they're essentially doing is they're giving the opportunity for landowners to get larger blocks of property that once used to be public land, and not to mention that public land generated revenue off of leasing, off of grazing leases or oil and gas leases or whatever. So do you know, that's another question no one's even talked about. Do the mineral rights go with those?
They do not. Okay. So it's and we have a split estate issue that could be developed here. So that it only applies to surface rights. But think about this too: the mineral rights stay with the federal government, and the surface rights go to a private developer, and then a neighborhood goes in. Let's just assume for purposes of argument that what the senators or what their proponents of this are asking for was actually true, that it's going to be used for housing. Well, what happens when you're like, there's oil under there? And if you're living in one of those houses, like, look, I live in a place where I've had neighbors, I had it myself. I had somebody come out and say, here's $30. We're going to do some geologic testing and pound the earth here, and it might cause some foundation problems to your house. Here's $30 for your trouble. Sign on the dotted line. And I refused, but a lot of people probably sign on the dotted line. So what happens in those types of environments? Well, the federal government may still want to make money off of those resources. And now you have these houses over it. And I know that I recognize there's directional drilling and all this stuff, but they got to do seismic testing and all kinds of things that there's great technology in the industry now, but it's not without any risk. So there's going to create I think there's a potential for those types of tensions to occur as well.
So one of the things in talking to people in my circles, and I want to say this again on record, I have yet to find somebody that is for this. And I've talked to hundreds of people in the last 5 days. Not a single person says, yeah, let's do this. A couple of them laughingly joked, why not use it? It's just sitting there anyway. But is there something bigger at play here that we're not hearing about? Could it be, rare earth minerals, or could it be, lithium mines, or could it be something bigger that they're having to do this in order to open up something else?
Oh, I mean, the way this bill is drafted, I'd say the sky's the limit. I don't want to pretend to read minds and know what they're thinking about, but the sky is the limit. So if you want to bypass, and I get this, like I'll preempt what I'm about to say by saying, I totally get the desire to do this, because this can be a frustrating thing. If there's a desire to bypass some of the federal bureaucracy and some of the laws that make it hard to get things done, one way you do that is to privatize the land, and then that takes a lot of the federal government out of it. Right? So if you want to get a mine done, in a lot of cases, then maybe you're just working with your state agency on a lot of stuff. You might not need federal permits for certain types of things. So it might streamline those processes to get things online. And I get the desire for that. I understand people's frustration with the system under which we operate sometimes. Yeah. So that's one thing. Like, I think of other examples. You may or may not be aware of this, but for a long time, there's been this proposal on the table. St. George, Utah is one of the fastest growing communities in the West, right? And they happen to be fast growing in a place that gets, inches of rain a year, like single digit kind of inches of rain a year. And they don't have a lot of water, and they have their water stresses. And they've been proposing this pipeline for a long time to run water out of the Colorado River from Lake Powell and pipe it over to St. George and use for municipal purposes. It's like 100 and some odd mile long pipeline that runs mostly through federal lands. Mm-hmm. Well, if some of those lands now came online for potential purpose, and you look at this, there's language in this bill that talks about for housing or associated community needs. Water's kind of an associated community need, right? Infrastructure. So you could see this being a process to acquire lands to help build a water pipeline, for example. I'm not saying that's the end game. I'm just saying there are a lot of infrastructure projects that are out there in some of these places that have been floated for a while that need federal land to get done. And there have been communities and people that have been really frustrated with the federal processes for getting it done. And so this could be a way to bypass that and just do it. That would be a very controversial one, right?
And you're talking about St. George, but as we all know, there's Phoenix, there's Las Vegas, there's a ton of big, large communities down south that on the near the Colorado River that would be probably a proponent of this, wanting to do this because of that.
Yeah. And I'm not going to, I don't want to wade into, sorry, that's a terrible pun. Didn't even know it until it came out of my mouth, but I don't want to get into that, really talking about Colorado River compact dynamics.
Right.
But I can tell you, having worked in water law earlier in my career, that when you start talking about moving water out of an over appropriated system into places, and there are a number of states that have rights in those water, you want to get it right. It's very, very controversial. Like moving water is a controversial thing in the West. And I don't, like I said, I don't want to say that's one of the underlying objectives, but to your question, it could be. Mines could be. Housing could be. I'm sure housing is part of it. Like, I don't want to diminish it to the point of saying like that we wouldn't build a house on any of these acres. I'm sure it's part of it. But I think the core motivation for this isn't housing. It isn't mining. It's not a pipeline. The core motivation is an ethos from some that just think these lands shouldn't be held by the federal government. And so we're going to come up with any excuse or justification to try and get these out of the federal government's hands.
Well, so that brings me up one of the other reasonings I've heard thrown around is it's to help balance the budget. But the amount of money that this is going to generate, that goes 90% of it, I think, is what you stated, goes to the Treasury. The amount of money is just a blip on our problem, right? I mean, it's not even a Band-Aid on a wound or your arm that's cut off. It's not even that.
This episode is brought to you by Browning Firearms. Guys, Browning has been manufacturing rifles since 1878 and is still recognized as a classic, traditional company with a long, proud history. If you fast forward 147 years and they still are continuing to deliver high-quality rifles to the market. The newest addition to the Browning lineup is the Browning X-Bolt 2 rifle. The X-Bolt 2 represents the next generation of award-winning bolt-action rifles from Browning. This new rifle is designed with the concept of total accuracy in mind, featuring elements that work together to help you perform at your best, whether at the range or in the field. New features include the Veritech stock, which provides the adjustability of a chassis-style stock while maintaining the traditional Browning appearance without adding extra weight. Check them out at browning.com. Browning, the best there is. This episode brought to you by Leupold Optics. The folks at Leupold have been manufacturing top-notch glass for over 100 years. They're a family-owned business just like mine, and that's why I'm so proud to partner with them to bring you these genuine conversations. If you're in the market for a rifle scope, look at the VX5 HD series. The VX5 HD line of scopes are the workhorse for the backcountry hunter. While you're at it, don't forget to check out the Leupold's full line of range-finding binos, regular binos, and their spotting scopes that are second to none and field tested in some of the hardest conditions on earth. The Leupold Gold Ring is the gold standard. Not to mention, in an extremely unlikely event that your Leupold glass has a hiccup, Leupold offers a lifetime guarantee that won't let you down. Leupold, be relentless.
I mean, I'd have to do a quick back of the envelope calculation, but what are we approaching now? $38 trillion in debt for the country. And the proposal would raise between 5 and 10 billion with a B dollars off of this proposed land sale. And that's if it actually pencils out that way. You and I both know that there are a lot of places where some of these lands in the remote locations might sell for $500 or $300 an acre, right? Because there's no water right associated with it. It's super dry. You can't make a living off of that land. It's not in one of the super desirable, Jackson holes or aspens or things like that, right? So yeah, it's I'd have to do that, divide that at the high end, that 10 billion into 38 trillion and see what that number is, but it's not going to do a darn thing. And on to the debt and to the budget deficit, we're talking about a budget deficit of whatever it is in the couple $1 trillion a year now that could potentially go up as well. Like this barely nibbles around the edge, to your point. Like it's not even a flesh wound.
No, it's not. It is absolutely pointless.
And you never get it back. Like
right.
So you do it once to try and patch it over. And here's my, sorry to belabor this for one more second, but this is the thing that makes my head hurt a little bit. Even if, like, say we could sell these acres and we could actually raise $38 trillion. It's just the most valuable land ever. And we could raise enough money off of these 3 million acres to actually pay off the national debt. Well, we've done nothing to solve our underlying spending problem in the country, and we're going to be right back here, dipping into the same well again 5 years from now or 10 years from now when we've overspent and got ourselves in a sticky wicket and now need our public lands to bail us out again. Our public lands shouldn't be the thing that bails us out from bad fiscal policy.
Yes, we should balance the budget. Like it's going to hurt. I've said this a million times. It's going to hurt to balance a budget. It's going to hurt me. It's going to hurt you initially, but long term, it's going to help our kids, for God's sakes. And the public land is not the place to go help fix that. I heard an analogy recently. It's like if you had a hotel and the hotel's not making money, you sell it. No, you actually fire the staff, figure out how to actually turn it around and make money with that instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, if we're making more analogies, it's like I'm taking my Big Chew bubble gum and trying to stick it in the hole of a dam that's leaking and hoping that's gonna patch up the spending problem we've got in the country.
Yeah,
it might hold for 2 or 3 seconds.
Big Chew's not a sponsor yet.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have given a brand.
So your background is in wildlife biology, and nobody but us that I've heard is really talking about that. How is this going to potentially affect the wildlife on the landscapes? We did this huge thing with migration corridor in the Red Desert, and Wyoming mule deer. They rely on a ton of public land corridors to migrate from winter to summer. That's going to affect it, I would assume.
I mean, there are obviously a lot of impacts on public lands. It's a multiple use environment. There are a lot of impacts. Most of the impacts are temporary, right? You have an oil well, it's temporary. You have, you name your thing. Yeah, it's temporary. Houses are way less temporary. And even if this is under housing, the places where people like to build houses, as it turns out, tend to be in kind of the foothills or the really scenic spots, or they actually tend to be in places that really matter to wildlife. In my view, one of the single biggest impacts and threats to wildlife migration and movement and overall habitat and connectivity is actually fragmentation for housing developments. And so even if we give the proponents the benefit of the doubt and say, this is going to be used for housing and here are the places it's going to be used. Like, think of Utah and the Wasatch Front. And the elk herds and mule deer herds there, and the impact that housing developments has on movement. We've seen it in Wyoming, in Jackson, how we now have bighorn sheep herds in the Tetons that don't migrate anymore, and their numbers are struggling because of it, because of housing developments that have gone in places where they migrate. Heck, the elk refuge was created in the first place because we just built over their winter range and cut off their migration, right? And that's not factored into this bill at all. There's nothing in here that says they have to take into account water resources or impacts to habitat or impacts to wildlife movement, things like that. There's no sideboards on that.
Well, I'm just to one of the things that we pushed a ton about with this migration is that Fremont Lake chunk that the state bought. I mean, I think it was like 300 acres or something, but it was a critical corridor where all these animals funneled through, and they had to funnel through because on one side's the lake, on the other is a housing development, and they were gonna sell that off and build houses. It would have cut 5,000 animals off from their winter range, and you're never going to get that back.
Yeah, and what happens when you cut that winter range, that migration route off for those mule deer? That herd goes from 5,000 to
zero.
Yeah,
right. Because they're so habitual, according to Kevin Monteith, they're so habitual they won't find another way. They'll stand there and starve. It's how they work.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, so once again, beautiful place around a lake. It's in Pinedale, which is a beautiful area. It would have been a great housing development from the human side. Horrible for the wildlife. So one of the other things, and you mentioned this early, is that it's the 11 Western states minus Montana. Now, how in the heck did they get out from underneath this?
I'm going to choose my words carefully here.
I appreciate that.
Because I've seen a lot of people saying there was some backroom deal between Senator Daines and Senator Lee. And I have it on pretty strong authority that that's not true. I actually have it on pretty strong authority that this is something that Senator Daines did not ask for and actually maybe didn't want. So it was included for some other reason. Really? And I can only speculate as to what those reasons would be. And I hesitate to do that, but I think part of it, I'll go with, this is as far as I'll go. I think part of it is to put Senator Daines and Senator Sheehy in Montana in a place where it's difficult for them to cash in any political capital they've built on this because it doesn't impact Montana.
Okay, so I was under the impression that Zinke was able, because it went through his community first, that he was very instrumental in pulling him out.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I'm just not going to weigh into that. Like there are a lot of conversations that happen with elected officials that we never hear anything about or know anything about. And then there's a vacuum sometimes that's created. And if there's not information in that that vacuum, the public puts information into that vacuum that it thinks makes the most logical sense.
Right.
Which sometimes can be true and sometimes isn't true. And so I haven't been willing to get into that and assign blame or credit or whatever it is. And in this instance, I'd actually, the one thing I would say is like I am pretty confident in some people that have told me information about Senator Daines's position on this, and that actually he didn't ask for this. Now, whether Representative Zinke did or not, I don't know, and so I'm not going to speculate about that.
I just think it's really interesting. There's an obvious reason. Why would you exclude them? They have some of the biggest housing problems. If this is the housing thing, you look at Bozeman and look at that area. That's a huge problem. You were talking about Jackson being the tip of the spear. Well, Bozeman's not far behind them. And there's a lot of public lands in a lot of checkerboard stuff in Montana. As maybe some don't know this, but the corner crossing thing really started in Montana. The fight came to Wyoming for various reasons, but it started in Montana. They've been doing this in Montana for decades.
Yeah, that crazy mountains area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So the whole Montana thing is interesting to me. So what can people do? The audience, I've heard, when we first came out, I was like, email your senators, get on the contact us page. And then I've had people that maybe not as entrenched in politics as you are, but have had that they have gotten change happen because they played the game. Tell me that that's not really the best way. It just gets, if you email them, it just gets lost in cyberspace and no one ever reads it, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that's true?
That's a tough question to ask. When I worked for the governor, I'd say we read everything that came through. But we got
economics of scale too.
It's scale. If we got form letters, like if we got 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 form letters, like, okay, it's a form letter. You got to go back and see, like, where are these calls coming from? Are they coming from in-state or out of state? Like, is this just just driving traffic to us? When the phone started ringing, and we had to, and we answered every call, right? So when the phone started ringing and our day was taken up with answering calls and responding to folks on an issue, that message we'd take that message to our elected official, let them know, man, we got so many calls on this. Letters are okay, because it's a touch point. It's like they know they just got tons of letters. What they don't know is, was it an actual letter from a person? Was it just a quick action alert click from an organization that nobody spent time on? But man, if you pick up the phone and you call, and here's the other thing I'd say is, don't just call the DC office. Like, there could actually be a ton of value in calling the state office, right? Remember that in the DC office, sometimes you have, a lot of, there's some great people there. I've worked with a lot of great people that work in the DC office. You tend to get folks that are earlier in their career in some of those positions answering those calls, and they aren't always from the home state that are answering those calls, taking those messages. So they might not have they have a vested interest in the senator they're working for sure. They may not have a vested interest in the state.
Mm-hmm.
You call that state office, those are the people that you go to church with, that you can see at the grocery store, that your kids play baseball, soccer with, like they're parts of our community and state. So it makes some sense to call there. I'd also say this, don't discount, and I'm going to have some elected friends that hate me for saying this part, because maybe it makes their phone ring, but don't discount calling your county commissioners and calling your local legislators, your in-state legislators on this too, because they have, if you're going in the hierarchy of the voice that the senators are listening to, if they have a bunch of county commissioners calling saying, this doesn't work, that's going to carry a bunch of weight. They have a bunch of state legislators saying, we shouldn't be doing this. That carries a bunch of weight. And those legislators and county commissioners might not feel compelled to call unless they are getting pressure too. So at this kind of moment, I view it as, if they went through a public election in your state, and it's worth calling everybody. But phone's better than email and letter, but anything's better than nothing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been hearing. Pick it up, call DC, leave them a message, because no one answers those phones. Leave them a message, but call your field offices. Call, and don't just, I asked my friend, I said, so would I just call the Cody one? He said, heck no, call them all. Call the one in Riverton. And come to find out, the gal in Riverton that works for Barrasso went to high school with my parents. Those are the people that and they'll know you, and they'll know your family, and they'll know, those are the people that, when asked, they know how to get it to Barrasso or Loomis or Hageman. Those are the ones that go, hey, our phone hasn't rang in a week, and we got 500 phone calls today. This is a problem. We need to listen to this. So pick up the phone, and don't call from your office. Call from your cell phone, so it's a unique number.
Totally agree. I think you're given the perfect advice on that.
Perfect. Well, David, so you kind of mentioned this as well. Does this set up, in your opinion, in your experience with these types of things, does this set a precedence that if it happens, it opens a door, no matter what the political environment is down the road? It allows the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture, which Interior is the BLM, Agriculture is the Forest Service, for those that don't know. It allows a precedence for them to do what they want to do down the road.
Yeah, the first time you do something politically is always the hardest time, and then it gets a little bit easier each time. So, obviously, huge resistance here. If somehow they get this through, we'll put up a fight every time. But in my experience, the first time you do something, it's the hardest politically. And then every time after that, it just seems to get a little bit easier. And other people will come out of the woodwork saying, oh man, we want the same thing here. Or that wasn't enough acres. We want to do more next time. Or maybe just a little less next time. But it certainly opens the door. It is one of those precedent setting moments.
So it makes it a little easier every single time. But they still would have to go back to the Senate and the House, or this has to go back to the House And can they strip language out of it again? Like, because didn't it passed the House, went to the Senate without this, and then they put it back in, right?
Yeah. So procedurally, you're right. So I'm sure nobody's forgotten this, but remember on the House side, just a month ago, there was the provision from Representatives Amade in Nevada and Malloy in Utah that would have led to the potential sale of up to right about 500,000 acres, right? I say potential because that one didn't have a mandate, must do this, must do that. It was opened it up for potential, could do it, 500,000. That was stripped out at like, I'm going to do this in a football context because we're kind of getting closer to football season. I'm getting excited about training camps opening up in a month, right? So I'll do it in this context. We're in a first and goal situation there on the House side, and they run a play or two, and then Representative Zinke comes up from his linebacker spot and just boom, smashes the running back, and it gets that thing stripped out at the 11th hour of that House bill. So there's no land sale piece in it. Comes over to the Senate, they have to pass a mirror bill. So the House passes their bill, the Senate has to pass a mirror bill. By that I mean the words have to be exactly the same on both bills, and if they don't, then whatever the Senate passes then has to go back to the House to get approved, because ultimately whatever goes to the president's desk has to be the exact same language approved by both houses. So this language was put in the Senate by Senator Lee, and if it were to pass the Senate, then the way I'm describing it in football terms is they've punched this to the 1 yard line. And it is a 4th and goal in the Super Bowl, and it goes back to the House, and it's up to Zinke and Downing and Simpson and other Republicans that were a no on this in the House to step up and put the ultimate goal line stand to win the game. Like that's what this is.
But they can they strip the language out of it again?
Yes.
And if they do, then it has to go back to the Senate because it's not a mirror bill then.
Right. So you have this, this negotiated, they kind of call it this conference. They have this negotiated, they work the negotiated language between the House and the Senate to get something that actually works. Okay. So eventually you got to get it finalized, and they want to move it fast as well. And that's the other thing that makes this hard is the timeline on this. Mm-hmm. If we had a year, right, it might be different. But we have this really aggressive timeline. And so, it's the play right now, it's in the Senate. But I would tell people call your senators like we were saying. But don't stop calling your representatives, because if for some reason this passes the Senate, the only backstop left is the House to pull it.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, then you're at a 4th and 1 in goal. That's it. So
yeah.
Oh, this is. I appreciate you coming on and explaining this to me as the simpleton and my audience, who there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of rhetoric going around about this. And you simplified it. You've read it. The political side of it, and now that we understand. Guys, get out there and call your representatives, call your county commissioners, call your governor's office, just call everybody that you can elect, or that you elected, and put some pressure on them to do the same thing and go up. And hopefully we can get this thing stopped at the Senate level, and we don't have to go to that 1st and goal and go back to the House and put more pressure on them.
Can I give you one more point too?
Absolutely.
The language that I wrote that blog on was the language we knew at the time I wrote it. And it's the language we still know at the time you and I are talking. I fully expect, in fact, I would be surprised if this doesn't happen. I fully expect that before the Senate takes a vote, that there is some sort of an amendment to this piece of this bill, this land sell-off bill, to try and narrow it more. I would suspect you'll see them try and narrow it more to focus more on housing and less on the far away parcels, and to really firm up language that existing permitted uses won't be impacted by this. And I would just say, don't take that bait. It's just another different type of bait they're dangling in the water. At the end of the day, it's still a mandatory sell-off of public lands. And so I'd just be cautious, because I expect that play is coming, and that there's going to be some justification of, we heard you, and we've narrowed it. It's not gonna impact your backyard. And the thing I've talked to a bunch of people, and maybe you're in the same boat. Like, we love the big backcountry. Like, I love wilderness hunts. I love all that stuff. I know that those lands aren't in jeopardy of being sold off. But you know how I got my start, and how a lot of kids get their start hunting? It's on the stuff really close to town.
It's the 5 acres right outside of town I shot my first mule deer on.
Bingo. And that's the stuff that would, like, regardless of what the final text says, that's the stuff I worry about that's still going to be in jeopardy. Yeah. It's that close to town, really important land that we've used to get people, where I learned to shoot, where I learned to shoot a rifle, a shotgun, where I shot my first animal, right? Like, that's the stuff I'm worried about more than anything. Because I've seen the maps, I've seen this stuff going out there about, oh my gosh, this, my place 10 miles deep in the backcountry is at risk. Like, probably not. Like, I'm not a hyperbolic guy. I don't want to say, like, that stuff's going to be sold. I'm worried about the checkerboard stuff for sure.
Yep.
I'm worried about some other little isolated parcels here. I'm worried about the migration stuff that you're talking about. And then I'm worried about them narrowing it and then losing some of that real front country, the closer to town hunting opportunities that we have and fishing opportunities that we have. Like, that's still on the table in my mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Just because, to add to that, we put a lot of pressure on the representatives to strip that language out of this thing when it was in the House, and it worked. But had we stopped there, it wouldn't be where it is today. Now it's okay. Don't stop there, and don't take the bait. You're right, 100%. They're gonna try and feed us something that appeases us as the American public to allow them to do this. Don't let them. I mean, it's no sell of public land. Period.
Yeah. And I got to read you one tweet. I'm not a Twitter, X, whatever guy. But I had somebody send me this Mike Lee tweet from a couple of days ago, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. Because I think it just shows the disconnect between the places we care about and what he's trying to accomplish. And he says, the Senate bill does not authorize the sale of national parks, monuments, or wilderness. That's true. I agree. This is the part that bothered me. It identifies unused garden variety federal parcels for potential disposal. Nothing more. He's calling the places, in my mind, the places that we hunt and recreate, and these places that are closer to town that are the things that mattered for getting our kids out there, garden variety public lands. Unused. And that really rubs me. Unused. I've been using them for my whole life, right? Like, it really bothered me when I saw that.
Unused. And I would say there is not living out west. That right there just proves he doesn't recreate on public land. Must be nice. But I don't know very many parcels of public land that are unused anywhere in Wyoming. Otherwise you wouldn't have 2 tracks everywhere, right? And that'd be a problem. That's a problem. Ask the BLM. It's a problem. I don't know any Forest Service that's not being used. In whatever garden variety means, I don't know, but you're right. That's infuriating.
Yeah, I mean, some of the places I hunt are a real pumpkin patch on opening day. I know it's used.
Boy, you are punny today. That's great.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm fired up about this. I'm fired up about this because I wouldn't be where I am professionally. I wouldn't be doing what I do today. I wouldn't have gone into the legal practice I went into if it weren't for growing up on public lands. Like, it's ingrained in the fiber of my very being. It's the reason why I will never leave this state that I love so much, right? I mean, it's the public lands. And so, yeah, I get I get punny and fired up a little bit about this stuff.
Well, you're right. I did the same thing. My wife and I were at University of Wyoming, and I was a senior getting job offers all over the country. And I looked at her and I said, I don't want to leave Wyoming. We have all this beautiful recreating, and this is what I do. This is what fires me up and keeps me excited, and is what makes me worth living, is all this recreating, all this public land. I don't want to leave this. And I could have went to New York and made a ton of money. I stayed here to be a banker for $25,000 a year and ate ramen noodles because of that public land. And I want my kids to have that opportunity, and my kids' kids to have that opportunity. We're one of the only countries in the world that treat our public land the way we do, and it's important to the American way of life.
Yeah, all of us that do this, that choose to live in like a state like Wyoming that's pretty rural and doesn't have a huge metropolitan area with a huge economy, we know that we're sacrificing some personal finances to make a decision to live here.
Yeah.
And the reason we sacrifice those personal finances, like the ability to make more money other places, is because of the outdoor rec opportunities that the state provides. So you have to be pretty entrepreneurial, and you have to work pretty hard in this state to make a living. But it's you know what? It's worth it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. That's right. Well, I appreciate your time, David. I know you're a busy guy, and you probably got some other things you need to do before the weekend hits. And I thank you again for jumping on that blog and doing it so quickly. Thank you for coming on this podcast and doing this all pro bono. I can't thank you enough for all of that.
Happy to do it, really. And I'm just so happy for what you're doing on this too. So deeply appreciative. And thanks to all your listeners who are out there fighting the fight as well.
Making a phone call right now.
Takes everybody. This is one of those that takes an army. All hands on deck.
That's right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
You bet. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Dave. Again, I appreciate it. We'll get this thing out. I think they're hoping to publish it today. And I know Luke's got your contact info and your social media guys' contact info, and we'll get it out there and get it in the hands of the people with the phones.
I appreciate that. We're also, I don't know if you're thinking about it, but well, you probably just heard about it, but that Mike Lee tweet has us so fired up that we're starting a social media hashtag garden variety, asking people to send us pictures of themselves hunting and fishing and doing whatever on public lands, on their garden variety public lands.
That's awesome. We will lean into that for sure. That is awesome.
Yeah. It's just kind of want to I just got so pissed about it yesterday when I saw it. I'm like, we're leaning into this, and we're gonna have everybody tag Mike Lee with their
garden variety photo.
With their garden variety photo.
Hell yes. Yeah. I'll do that. Perfect. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks again. And I'm going to get some sleep this weekend. I was up until like 2:33 in the morning trying to crank that blog out. I was like, we got to get this out fast.
What? and then you said, then Todd's like, he won't let us pay him for it. I'm like, really? So that's how David is. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. No way am I going to ask for payment on this. Like, use that money to amplify other stuff you're doing and win this fight. Like, yeah, 100%.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate it. Well, have a good weekend, and I can't wait to see your garden variety photo.
I got some good ones. Yeah, you have a good weekend too.
All right. See you later.
All right. See you.